Not all of the crowd is here, I hope, but anyway, all of us, you know, think about accumulating funds, and sometimes we think we can take it with us, but of course we can't. But this one chap was so materialistic, he accumulated $3 million, and he wanted it to go in his grave with him. So he sought out three clergymen, a Protestant minister, a Catholic father, and a Jewish rabbi. And he said, if I give you each $1 million in cash, will you guarantee me that you'll put it in the casket just before they lower it? And they made that commitment. And a short time later, why, he passed away. And then 2 or 3 years later, these clergymen were meeting at a seminar. And the Protestant minister said, you know, old Joe, that we made the commitment to $1 million, I have a confession to make. I took a few $100s of that million because we needed new hymnals for our church. And the Catholic father says, gosh, I'm glad to hear you say that. Said, we needed a few television for the boys club. So I took a few $100s. And the Jewish rabbi said, gentlemen, you mean after making that commitment to old Joe that you would do that? And they said, you mean you put the $1 million in? He said, absolutely, I put my personal check in there for $1 million. So we really can't take it with us, can we? Well, this afternoon, I have the pleasure of introducing Ormond Buffington, who was with our good friends from the 455th. Incidentally, this is the second go-around now that we've had the 455th with us, and seems to be working real good. And I think with just a little more exposure, why the population can increase and be even better. But Ormond is was a flight engineer, and all of us, of course, that were on the cruise, I hope all of us, I always thought the flight engineer was without question the number 2 person on the plane. Not too far beyond the pilot, because if anything went amiss, it was the flight engineer that usually looked after it. And I know in our own case, we had a flight engineer that was quite a bit older for that time period, probably 30. He was a genius with fixing things. And we had a bad hydraulic hit, and he fixed it up in midair and got a DFC for it. And it's the only way we could have gotten home. So I noticed that Ormond also got a DFC. So I know that he has his share of exciting moments. So Norman, tell us what a flight engineer does.
Thank you for that introduction. Give me the big head, really. I don't know about this flight engineer, whether he is all that good or not. I do know one time it's been about 2 meetings ago, 2 years ago, two reunions. One of my members and I were discussing about how you aimed your guns at an attacked fighter. One of us said you shot between the nose of the fighter and the tail, and the other said you shot in front of the nose, you led the fighter. And we discussed that a little bit, and finally I said, well, let's just ask this man over here. So we put the question to him, and you could just see wisdom flowing out of his ears. He said, you're both right. So if anything I say you disagree with, you're right and I'm right too. I flew I got to San Giovanni, Giagnola, on the 4th day of June in 1944. And the colonel met us and told us that you boys rest tomorrow and you'll fly the next day. So the next day was D-Day. The last mission, and we've discussed this 30 mission limit and 50 mission limit and 30 whatever, but I still claim I had 51 somethings. I don't know what. But the 51st mission was flown on October the 14th. Now, Friday, the 13th, the day before, we tried to make it on that day, but they had to call the count off. But all flyers, or none of them really, are superstitious. They don't believe in things of that nature. You know, that your good luck charms, or giddy-giddies, as the North Africans used to call them. So you know, I was the same way, but you just can't take any chances that way. You know there's not anything to it, but you just don't take a chance on doing something that was wrong. Like we had a man that wore coveralls, and he wore them every mission. Every time the plane left the ground, he had the coveralls on. Well, he was afraid to wash them, afraid that they'd be wet when he had to fly. So needless to say, they got pretty dirty, but the good part of that was he didn't have to hang them up. He could just stand them in the car. We had several different things. I had a leather helmet that with my earphones and all that made all the missions with me. We had one man that had a flak hat, steel helmet, and the wings, the flaps that covered the earphones, they were all plastic. And every time when we got close to the IP, well, he had put that flak hat on with the next generation.
Protection.
I give you .1. I didn't say that.
Black comes in all directions.
Oh, in the tent area, of course, when we got to San Giovanni there, the tent and in the olive grove, inside the dirt floor is dirty and all, and they're doing different projects around the buildings and all, and they'd have a pile of sand out there. So I had the bright idea of getting this sand and putting it in the floor of our tent. It wouldn't be dusty or anything like that. So we got buckets and sacks and all, and we'd make a trip, and of course there, well, anything that was not personally owned is free to pick up. It was available if you could get it. But we floored the tent with this sand, and it looked good too. One morning I got up and looked down at my legs, feet, sand fleas.
Oh.
Sent the boy over to supply and got a whole case of DDT. That was before you found out you couldn't use it. Yeah, we put that on, but it worked. It killed all the fleas at least. Had a tent boy. I don't know whether y'all had a tent boy, bring you water, swept your tent out, ran, anything you wanted, you send your tent boy after. And this little boy, I guess 10, 11 years old, and had knickers on, right below the knees, and came up, and then had a shirt on with sleeves down to his elbow, and then a vest on top of that. And this is in June, you know he's burning up. So we got to looking for a pair of shorts and a shirt for him, and finally found one that was a little about the size. So, oh, he's proud of me, really was. He folded them up and took them home. And the next morning, when he came to work, you should have seen those things. He was so proud of me, just like walking on clouds. Had them on top of all of this. But there's a lot of those things that way that you think back on. Oh, B-24, and this is what I should get into this, but they had a relief system on it, relief tubes. And it had a container right under the flight deck and a tube that overflowed. And of course, when it filled up, the prop wash it out. So one day we landed, and the belly gunner, he got out and went to the tool shed that you had there, and came back with a hammer. And I said, what are you gonna do? He said, I'm fixing to break this tube that overflows down here. I said, why are you breaking it for? He said, every man on this crew has pissed in my face. That's overflowing. I always think about a 100th mission party that we had when the 455th did their 100th mission. And by the way, Narragansett, any y'all ever heard of Narragansett beer? They had a truckload of that stuff and unloaded it there. That's what we drank at that 100th mission party, Narragansett beer. Never saw another anywhere else, but it's pretty good. But the performance they had, and I don't know if it was an outfit, local outfit and all, but they had a stage and a dressing area and another stage. The dressing area was between the stages, you know. And they had some good-looking woman. Of course, you didn't see many women, you know, but you noticed them and all. And she sang, I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, is that white? And her English, she'd say, Christmas. And she'd sing that, Christmas, Christmas. But anyway, it was good. Then after she got through singing, she'd go through the dressing area and come out on the other side, and everybody would go around, you know, and she'd do a striptease act on that. I'll tell you another thing I did not long ago on one of our meetings. I was asked to return thanks or say the blessing. And I got up to the podium and I said, bow your heads. And I went as blank as you've ever heard. I couldn't say a word. And I made a resolution then that from then on, I'd have my notes ready. The worst or the biggest mission that I flew was on June the 26th. The 455th group led the whole 15th Air Force in an attack on Moose Beer Bomb, which was oil refiners and all. And I've found in battles of that type, you're partly consumed with what you've got to shoot at right now, and plus the outside part of all the other planes and everything. We were in the second echelon and in the number 4 position, which was probably the best position we could be in. And all at once, our lead plane, but no, it didn't explode or anything, it just started losing altitude and dropping down. The one on the left, 3 fighters was attacking it, and the one on the right got a direct hit from the ground. Now, when we first started our attack and all, it was a beautiful day. I got sun shining and flying. There wasn't a ripple in anywhere. Had P-51s giving us coverage. They had the auxiliary tanks flying at angles over us this way. And you could you could almost relax and enjoy it, really, if you knew you were going where you were going. But all at once, they dropped these auxiliary tanks and bore off that way. They were 20, I think, ME-210s that was attacking, and their part in the show was to withdraw our coverage. And they did, and about 2 or 3 minutes later, there was about 60 airplanes, German planes, 109s and 210s, that attacked us. The route of, after we hit the IP, was a gradual curve. Well, in doing that maneuver, some way, one of the elements did not make the turn, and it spread our formation. And there's about 150 German planes attacked, not only us, but the other bomb groups that was following us. And you could see U.S. good old B-24 just as far as you could see. It was group after group was coming to make the attack. The thing that I did, and this gets back to what I said, the individual fighting. 3 of the 109s made an attack, a pursuit curve, I believe they call it, on the plane right next to us. Well, I picked it up, fired at it. The next one was right behind him, was also attacking that plane. And I put a good bit of shots in him. And one of the men on that plane said, "Buff, you got him, you got him." Then someone said, "Oh, my aching back," which was behind us, said, "They got a direct hit." Well, everybody looked to see that except me, and I was looking at the third plane that was attacked him, and I did cut him to pieces. But nobody saw it. So when I reported, they said, "You can't give you a credit for shooting one down if nobody saw it fall." And of course I said, "You don't want to whip them." But finally, the man that saw it, the first one, they gave me credit for that. And then this other one, they said, "Well, we'll give you a probable for it." So that's the way the record is. One confirmed and one probable. But I know I got that other one. The 455th Bomb Group on that day put 36 planes in the air. They lost 10, which would have been 100 men. over the target. Two of the planes were severely damaged and did not get back to our base. They had some people, I don't think they were fatally wounded, but they were severely wounded. And I don't know how many other people, but that was really the worst, well, the worst battle that I was on. In fighting, and I tested the twin 50s, I don't know what those are. I tested them back when we first got to altitude, and then as they attacked in close, but as the different planes were attacking us from every direction, I've never even heard of anything. They attacked from 12 o'clock, just straight on. In fact, one was shot in two, and top of one of it went over us, one under us. They come down from right straight down through the path of our bombers and come up from the bottom and stick their nose up. Anyway, there's no problem of finding a target. I could put my guns and find the target and all. Well, all at once my guns buckled and quit firing. Then I looked down, have two belts of ammunition to fill your cans, 100 or 200 rounds in each one. The first belt goes layered like that. The second one should be attached up here and layered and go on to the gun. The second belt was attached to the bottom, and the booster motor on my gun would not pull it out of from under the layer of shells. So I had to cut one gun off and pull it out with my hand that way, and kept firing with one gun. Then something else, it blocked it again. Well, I looked out, you had a spent cartridge case, about a 5-foot bag, and it was filled to capacity, and that jammed everything up. So I reached my foot up there and kicked it off, and did pretty well from there on. I could shoot one gun anyhow. But we had, I guess, 4 inches of spent cartridges all over the flight deck. But when we got back, I asked them, we landed, the 2 or 3 of the upper brass came by to see how we had made the flight and all. And I asked them to see how the armor that had put my ammunition in, if he was there, to tell him to come see me. And they did. He came in, and I showed him what he had done on that. And I told him, I said, if I wasn't so happy to be back here on this ground, walking around, I'd pistol whip your ass all over the hall. And I told him, I said, I don't want to see you here around any plane that I fly in from now. And really I didn't. All in all, I had several close calls, and I just thank the good Lord that I'm back here, 90 plus years old. And I appreciate y'all listening to me.
Well, thanks, Ormond. Now, did you get a Distinguished Flying Cross for that mission?
Yes.
That
was it.
And it was hard for individual members of a crew, other than the pilot, to be awarded a Distinguished Flying Cross. So I know that was a very special mission, and we're pleased that you shared it with us.
I think that was the same mission. Y'all got the presidential unit citation as well, right?
Yes, we got the presidential citation on that mission.
That's an interesting comment. It seems like that you had to lose a significant portion of your planes to earn a presidential unit citation. I mentioned yesterday that on August the 22nd, we lost 1/3 of our planes. We did not get a unit citation for that. However, the bomb group, I think it was the 461st, that was right with us in the wing, they also lost a lot of planes that day themselves. And they did get a president's unit. And then the next day, we lost another 1/3 of our planes, and we did get a citation for that. So it was unfortunate that the citations usually came when you had a disastrous mission. Okay, now our next speaker has agreed to fill in for us. We had to change our speakers a bit. And Mike Hill is the son of Sedge, and as I mentioned before, has devoted a lot of time to our bomb group. Probably might well know more about the 451st than any other single individual, because he's researched it a lot, and he's already apprised me of things that I didn't know about our bomb group. So Mike is going to kind of give us an overview of some of his findings, and we're delighted to have him join us.
Well, according to the program, the gentleman was supposed to speak about, I believe, special missions. Well, as you already know, I didn't fly with the group, so I don't have a special combat mission to talk about. But it seems like everybody starts their little talk with a little story. So when we were doing the research for the history book on the 451st, we were doing a lot of it at Norfolk, Virginia reunion. And there was this gentleman sitting there, and he had his World War II jacket on. He was aged, and he had the nice patch, and he had all these nice bombs stenciled on the back. He had his 35 on there, and we were talking, and I mentioned his jacket and everything, and I said, you know, I said, when I get back to Minot, when I get home, I'm going to take my leather flight jacket, and I'm going to paint 415 bombs on it. He looked at me and he said, 415 bombs? And I said, yeah. Because I said, during the researching and the writing of this book, I said, I have reflown every mission that the 451st flew. And the 451st flew 415, so I'm getting 415 bombs, one way or the other. Actually, though, I do have a special mission. Many years ago, I served on the board of directors for our local air museum in Minot, and that kind of opened up some doors for me. This last July the 3rd, actually 2 days before that, the Collins Foundation flew into Minot in their B-24, their B-17, and their P-51. And they were there for 3 days. And, of course, the director of the museum called me and he says, Mike, he says, the B-24 just landed. He says, you want to come up and get some pictures of it without a lot of tourists standing around, meaning people. Because I don't like pictures of airplanes with people that I don't know standing in front of it. So I went up and took some pictures, and lo and behold, if you want to ride on it, they're going to be selling rides. You can have a half-an-hour ride in a B-24 for $450. Check the bank account in a hurry. I'm going to do this. So I told the director of the museum, you know, put me on the schedule. I said, I want to ride on the Witchcraft. And he said, well, you know how much it costs? I said, yeah. I said, I don't care. He says, hold off a minute. He says, the Collins Foundation has let us know that they're going to, from Minot to Fargo when they leave. And they have graciously said that we can take up to 10 people of our choosing on the B-17 and on the B-24. He says, I'll see if I can't get you a slot. He called me about 8:30 that night and says, Mike, get your flight suit ready. You're flying on the B-24. So we went up there. We were supposed to be there at 11 o'clock. We were there at 11 o'clock. Well, we got a tire problem. So they had to fix the tire on the B-24. Finally, they get us all together about 4 in the afternoon. And first of all, you had to have the safety briefing by the flight crew. And they said, as soon as we're airborne, you can go any place in the airplane you want. There's only 2 places you can't go. One is the spare, or the balls turret. I didn't want to go there anyway. I mean, no. And the top turret, because the top turret was holding their luggage that they were going to need down in Fargo. Well, the top turret was one place I did want to get, but, and he says, and by the way, he says, once we get airborne, we do have one thing, you know, you're going to be going back and forth through the aircraft. Please, under no circumstances, step off the catwalk onto the Bombay doors. If you lose your hat, your camera, forget it, leave it there. We'll get it when we land. Don't step on the Bombay doors because they're spring activated and somewhat flimsy. And if you go out, we're not coming back to get you. The other thing is if you're crawling through the nose, please, under no circumstances, step on the nose wheel doors. They're also spring activated, and again, we're not coming back to get you. So anyway, we load up, and of course, 99% of all you guys are familiar with the first class accommodations on a B-24 Liberator. And right there, the bulkhead where you step down to crawl into the Bombay, there's this wonderful little ledge that has the seat belts. So you squat down like this and you seat belt in and you take off. As soon as we took off and the buzzer goes off, you got free rein of the airplane. So the first thing I do is, of course, go over to the waist guns and immediately shoot down, I don't know, 20 or 30 fighter planes. And then we were being attacked from the other side, so I moved over to the other side and single-handedly fought off the entire Luftwaffe again. So then I moved back to the back and I started back towards the tail turret. And it was really nice. They put this real nice handrail right alongside the one side, you know. Well, of course, you gentlemen know that wasn't a handrail at all. That was the chute the ammunition flowed through to get to the tail turret. But it was a nice handrail, it really was. I get back to the tail turret and I looked out through the tail turret and, geez, that's really a nice view. I want to get in there. Now, believe it or not, folks, I managed to fight my fat body into the tail turret. It was even more of a task to unfight my body out of the tail turret. But I did manage to get out. So I moved back through the waist, and I crawled down into the Bombay, and I looked at the Bombay doors, and I said, no, 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 I'm not stepping on those. And the Bombay is really interesting. It's nice and drafty. It's nice and noisy. And, of course, the bomb racks, for you folks who never had the opportunity to be in one, slant inward towards the catwalk. And you have about this much distance between the two Bombays on the catwalk. So I went through sideways like this, holding my tummy in, and got through. And gets up to the nose compartment, the flight deck underneath there. And I look up, and here's the pilot and co-pilot. They're both asleep. And the actual guy who was acting as crew chief, he's curled up on the side of the aircraft, and he's asleep. And I thought, who's flying this thing? Oh, autopilot, no problem. So anyway, I crawled underneath, and I got up where the nose wheel was, and I looked at that spacious little area to the right side there where the crawl through to the nose, and I thought, no, I'll never make it. And then I remembered, this is the only time in your life you're going to be on a B-24, do it. So I crawled into the nose, and I'm looking around where the spacious accommodations for the bombardier and navigator were. And I look up at the nose turret and, oh, do I want to climb into that nose turret and get that beautiful panoramic view that I've heard so much about from the nose gunners. And I looked at it again, and I looked down at how to get into the nose turret, and I thought, no, I have to climb over the bomb sight, I have to step on this little thing, I have to put one leg in there. After what I went through in the tail turret, no, there's no way that I'm gonna fight this old fat body into that little tiny piece of plexiglass. So sadly, all I did was get as close as I could and hold my camera up through the nose and take pictures. But we came around and I crawled all through the aircraft. It was kind of funny because when we got down, I saw that I had taken 275 photographs on my digital camera that we unloaded. And we flew into Fargo, we landed. But the funny thing about it was is when we left Minot, the group that was on the B-17, I was giving them a bunch of nonsense because I do know a little bit about B-24s, having written 5 books that deal partially with B-24s. And I was telling this guy, I said, we'll see you guys in Fargo, we'll be waiting for you. He says, nah. He says, we're going down together. Well, then we find out that the B-17 is going to take off before we do. And I still say, we'll be waiting for you in Fargo. Nah, we're going to be out in front of you guys all the way. So we take off. We get to Fargo, we taxi in, and they were in a hurry to get rid of us out of the airplane because they had a media ride for the radio and TV stations there. So we get out of the airplane, no B-17. So we go over to the Air Museum, we go in and we get a nice cold Coca-Cola, ice in it, nice and everything. And we're sitting there and pretty soon the B-17 taxis in. And the guys that were on that walk over and I were sitting there and what kept you guys? And I caught a little bit about that. But the whole thing about it was that I was so honored to be able to fly on Witchcraft. And as we were flying, after I had made my tour, and had been just about everywhere I wanted to be in the airplane, I was sitting there playing with the waist guns and, of course, you know, shooting down the whole Luftwaffe. And I went back and I was kind of tired, so I was leaning against the bulkhead and I was looking back towards the tail and I saw the waist guns kind of swaying in the breeze and I saw everything else. And I started suddenly remembering the stories and the comments that I had heard over the years of research and writing about the 451st and the 464th and the other groups that had flown in B-24s. And I remembered what they told me about incidents that had happened in the waist gun area, guys, their buddies getting shot, or the tail turret getting blown off, or taking a direct hit in the nose guns in the pilot's area and the bomb bay, and coming back and not being able to drop the bombs, and in order to get back, salvo and drop the bombs right through the bomb bay doors and have the doors flapping in the breeze coming home. And then I remembered reading or having guys tell me the ground crew stories about patching these things, about, sadly, about cleaning them up after they had removed some of the wounded crew. And I sat there, or stood there in Witchcraft, watching and taking it all in. It suddenly came over me that I had an experience of a lifetime. It was a special mission, in that I obtained a whole new understanding and deep appreciation for what these men did in those aircraft in World War II. And what really brought it home was I was in the back, behind the waist guns, sitting on it. It was a modern piece of B-24 equipment. It was an iceberg cooler that the white people carried their drinks in. And I was sitting there with the full blast of the wind coming through the waist. And we were only at 5,000 feet. And I'm sitting there, and I'm starting to, and it was the 3rd of July, we left when it was 92 degrees. We're at 5,000 feet, and I have a Nomex flight suit on, and I'm getting kind of chilly. And I thought about these guys at 22,000 feet in December, 40 below zero, with that wind flying through, and it really brought it home to me. Well, one other thing about my flight on this airplane, and I had planned this, was that on my flight suit that I was wearing that day, on my chest here, I had the reproduction patch of the 451st Bomb Group. And on my shoulder, I was wearing a 15th Air Force patch. And on the other side, here, I was wearing a very special patch from the 451st Air Expeditionary Wing at Kandahar that's in the shape of a B-24 rudder that carries the markings of the old 451st. In my chest pocket here, I carried my dad's original 727th Bomb Squadron patch, along with a reproduction 727 patch. And down in one of my leg pockets, I carried another bag of patches that my son-in-law gave me. And he brought those back from the 451st Air Expeditionary Wing at Kandahar, Afghanistan, where the 451st still operates today. And he brought me back a patch of all of the patches that the 451st has there in Kandahar. So I had those in my leg pocket. So in a roundabout way, on July the 3rd, 2014, the old 451st and the new 451st came together in a B-24 over North Dakota. And that's my special mission. If you have any question at all about anything, not only that, but yes, sir.
Mike, you said you was in witchcraft.
Yes.
What was that? Was that the original All-American?
Yes.
flag?
The Collins Foundation, originally when they first refurbished it, it was called the All-American to honor the 15th Air Force. And then after that, they repainted it to the dragon in his tail to honor the Air Force in the Pacific. And now it's painted in olive drab as the Witchcraft to honor the 8th Air Force.
There's a couple of us paid to have that All-American come to Omaha.
Yeah.
At one of them.
Yeah, I was there. Oh, I gotta add one thing about this Omaha trip that, the reunion 451st in Omaha, they had the All-American there. And they took one of the trips that they were gonna take was, they put everybody on buses and they all went to Fairmont Field, Nebraska, which was where the 451st took their Phase 3 training just before they deployed overseas. And the All-American was supposed to come down and land and be there for this. And it was like 95 degrees out. The humidity was probably 90%. It was hot. It was a miserable day. And these guys get off the bus and they're milling around the old airfield and looking around and remembering the hangar and, you know, our Quonset hut was over there and all that. And it was getting time for the All-American to show up, but it didn't show up. And so they're all out there, and they had a program, Bob Carson had a program, and they had dignitaries and everything, and they were gonna get ready to start. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the All-American did what I call a sneaky Pete pass, and he came right over the top of everybody with all 4 engines just screaming.
Wow.
It was a P-51.
And a P-51, the gunfighter, they came over in formation. They came over, they went straight out and kind of broke away. And these guys, when they saw that B-24 go over, you know, instantaneously, they were 19 years old again. And they were jumping up and down and yelling and screaming and carrying on and had a wonderful time. The All-American landed, taxied in, and we got her shut down and everything, and then they had their program. And they had one of these plastic chain link snow fences out there to keep everybody back, you know. Well, I forgot who it was, but it was Bob Carson that spoke, and I forgot who else it was, and you know, and the dignitaries were speaking, and the people were starting to get up off the bleachers and kind of move like this, and the next thing you know, they're closer to the fence, and the next thing you know, they're closer to the fence, and finally the dignitaries got done and they dismissed everybody, and the fence literally fell down, and all these guys that were 19 years old again rushed out to be with the B-24. And a lot of the guys, that's the first time they'd seen a B-24 since they saw them overseas. And it was just marvelous to see those guys going up there and touching it, you know, and caressing it and all that. It was marvelous. And yeah, I do remember that. It was a great experience. So, but anyway, that was my special flight, and I'll always remember it as a special flight. If All-American or Witchcraft ever comes to an area where you're at, go out and see it. It's truly a marvelous experience, and next time it comes to Minot, I don't care. I'll just pay $450 again just to go up there and fly in it again. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mike. I mentioned earlier that the books that Mike had authored are still available, and if anyone hasn't had the opportunity to read them, why, don't hesitate to check with Mike, and he can probably arrange for copies to get to you. Now, is Alex Garcia here today? Yes. Okay. Alex? Alex was in the administrative staff, and I thought it would be good to, first of all, recognize that the operations of the bomb group depended upon many, many different elements of the 15th Air Force, and I think we take for granted that we just had mechanics and air crew, but there were many other sections, armaments and so forth and so on. So Alex is just going to tell us about a typical day in his work. So Alex, we're delighted to have you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. You don't like to be called Mr. Jones. A typical day in administration and supplies, which take a lot of efforts and hard work for a lot of people involved. Prior to that, I took my training in Jefferson Barracks, and I was in charge of supplies and inventory, flying clothes, caps, pants, down to the boots. And the regular boots weren't warm enough for the pilots and the crew, so they started putting electricity into them to warm them up. When we weren't busy taking care of everything else, selling supplies, we were cutting out 5-gallon cans with the hammers and chisels, and we were planting water lilies in the desert prior to going into Italy. And when we got to Italy, we started doing the same thing. And those were, believe it or not, were used for urinals. We would plant them out in the desert, and then in Italy, sideways, a little bit sideways, slanted, and those were for emergencies only. Typical days, the guy would come in after a raid to replace equipment damaged or torn. And like I said, it was the boots and the caps and everything else. A lot of things were lost. And the following day after a raid, they would come after the supplies they needed, and they always had to come in with a requisition slip signed by their CO, their commanding officer. And it seems like time just flies by, and on Sundays we would have the mechanics build us, repair Italian bicycles, French bicycles, German bicycles, English bicycles, and made motorcycles out of them. So Sundays we would take a ride until one guy broke his arm, And that was the end of our Sunday service. That was funny. So that's about all there was. It wasn't very exciting, but it kept us busy and out of trouble most of the time. We had a beautiful officers club, and later we made a Yardbird club. And that was in competition with them because we had gambling. We had dice tables, and we had ping pong tables. So we passed the time away when we weren't busy doing those things. Enjoying our company with the boys. That's about all there was to it. Doesn't sound very exciting, but to us it was, because it killed time and took our mind off of our fellow members that were getting killed and wounded, which is the sad part. Thank you for your attention. Sorry it wasn't more exciting.
Thank you, Alex. We have a little time, and several, I think, of the survivors present might want to share some of their special moments. I'll just mention a few things in our crew that was kind of personal. We were on the IP, and the flak was heavy, and sometimes when the flak shells would explode quite close to the bomber would shudder. It was an unusual feeling. It was almost like someone was putting the brakes on a little bit. And anyway, I had seen enough planes explode quickly that I knew that if you took a direct hit, it was just a matter of seconds as to whether you got out of the plane or not. Because once it started to spiral down, there was no hope. So, to make a long story short, I didn't know this at the time, but I heard the loudest noise I think I've ever heard, in flight anyway, and I was certain that our plane had taken a direct hit. So I was out of the turret. You can't believe how fast Big Jones can move. And I located my parachute, had it on, and the bomb bay doors were open, and I was ready to go. And I looked forward, and the pilot and co-pilot weren't making any spatial motions, and the plane was flying. So I realized that probably we had not had a direct hit. So I rather sheepishly took my parachute off, climbed back in the turret, and the flight went on. Well, the next day, one of the mechanics found right below my turret a big piece of flak that had hit the ring gear of my turret and had fallen straight down. It was, any one of you that's played golf know that if you hit a shot that hits the stake, it's rare that it goes right in the cup. And for this piece of flak to hit a moving target like, and that had made a crescendo of noise when it hit that ring gear. And I have that flak to this day as a good reminder of my good luck. And on another occasion, a piece of flak came through the window of the co-pilot's and didn't hit him in some manner, but it hit the pilot's flak helmet and knocked it off his head. It didn't any major damage to him. It just happened, that way. On another occasion, a plane off to our left took a direct flak hit, and it tilted up and started right toward our plane. The pilot of that plane, I happen to remember, is Robinette. And our nose turret gunner felt for sure that our luck had run out, because there was nothing worse in flight than to have a collision of two bombers. Often they blew up. And so we don't know to this day how it happened, but that plane went under our plane, and the nose turret gunner swears it couldn't have been more than feet that it missed us. So there were times when, you know, we had a couple 300 flak holes in the plane. A piece of flak would come in, the skin one side and go right out the other side. And how we ever managed to get through with only one person hit by flak, I'll never know. I know my own dome and my turret had little holes blistered with flak, and not a piece hit me. But so you had to be lucky. I mentioned this to one of my golf partners that I was having trouble getting putts to drop. He said, "You used up all your luck." There is no more. So there may be others here that would like to share some experiences, personal or that happened to their crew. Is there anyone? Mike?
I got a quick one. It has nothing to do with our groups here, but when I did the book that I wrote on the infamous low-level mission to Ploiești, horrible mission, terrible losses. But there was an airplane called Utah Man. The pilot was a gentleman by the name of Walter Stewart. And he was a Mormon missionary before the war and everything, and he was very religious, still is very religious. And anyway, going into the target, they got hit so bad. They had a hole in the right wing that was bigger than a bushel basket. They were losing fuel, everything. They had 3 bombs get hung up in the bomb bay. They finally ended up getting rid of them. They had holes all over the place, and the number 4 engine was backfiring and coughing and everything. And he was getting ready to crash land, but the the top turret gunner said, no. He said, we still got some bombs on board, but that was before they got rid of them. So they got rid of them finally. They're out there, they're making their way back towards the Mediterranean, and they get to the Mediterranean, and every time Walt would get the airplane up to over 142 miles an hour, it would start to vibrate and shake. And they're hanging there in the air, flying along, and they get going any faster, and they're shaking and vibrating so bad. And the thing is that Walt and the crew all the time, when they got done with the mission, they'd have a short prayer, just thanking the good Lord that they'd gotten away from the target. They get to the Mediterranean Sea, and they're low on fuel. And he asked the engineer, he says, how much fuel we got? We got enough to get across the Mediterranean? He says, I don't know how much fuel we've got on board. I've never seen an airplane, a B-24, this low on fuel. So anyway, he's ready to land it right there and there before they go out on the Med. The top turret gunner was a big old lumberjack from Montana, and he hit the intercom, and he says, before we decide, he says, let me tell you something. He says, we got rivers in Montana that are wider than this so-called ocean. He says, let's go home. So they pulled the crew. The crew said, let's go for it. So they're out in the middle of the Mediterranean. It's later on in the afternoon, and they're still hanging there in the air. And they would tune in the BBC on the radio if they could get it. And they tuned it in, and sure enough, they were able to get this broadcast from England over the BBC and over the radio waves. And the guy out there said, ladies and gentlemen, we have a great show for you this afternoon. We got a lot of great music for you GIs out there. And so he said, so we're going to be playing this. Now the cute thing about this was the radio operator was a practical joker. And he was always doing something strange on the radio when they were coming back. So anyway, you hear the sound of the radio being tuned, and all of a sudden, Walt said that this beautiful young voice, or this guy came on again. He says, so ladies and gentlemen, Armed Service Radio, he says, here it is, the real latest hit from back home in the United States. Here we got Dinah Shore singing, coming in on a wing and a prayer. And Walt hit the intercom, and he says, Brackus, don't do that. You know, the man upstairs, we're almost, you know. He says, it ain't me, Walt, it ain't me, it's for real. And sure enough, over the airwaves came Dinah Shore singing, coming in on a wing and a prayer. And they made it across the Mediterranean. They landed at Benghazi after the mission, and as they were landing, they landed straight in, and as they taxied in and shut the engines down, everybody got out and kissed the ground and thanked the good Lord that they were back. And then the crew chief came over and he measured the tanks with the dipstick,
And he said, there ain't enough fuel in the bottom of those tanks to even get the stick wet. So they literally came home on a wing and a prayer. For that was a great story that Walt told me when I was doing that research, and I put it in the book because I thought it was great about coming home on a wing and a prayer. And a lot of guys came home on a wing and a prayer.
Thanks, Mike. Well, you know, you talked about the Mediterranean. If the plane was low on fuel or had damage and the pilot decided to make a run for it, it was very, very hazardous, because when a V-24 had to be ditched, the average survival rate was 25%. So if you didn't get back to home base and you had to ditch it in the Mediterranean, we did have one pilot that did ditch, and only one person was killed, and that was due to the top turret fell down and crushed him when they hit the water. But probably many of you have read the book Unbroken?
Yes.
A bestseller for many, many months. Well, that is a wonderful story of B-24, I believe, in the Pacific.
They're making a movie out of it.
Yeah, and incidentally, the survival rate was 3 people, and 1 died on the raft. So it confirmed kind of what I mentioned, the 25%. But there were things that happened, you know, to our crew. One time we lost an engine, and this was over the target, and the plane fell about 10,000 feet. Somehow the pilot got control of the plane. I don't know whether they got an engine started or not. But anyway, so we were all alone. And as you know, the Germans love picking on cripples, single planes, because if they brought 2 or 3 fighters up, they could come in at angles that was most difficult to cover. And so from my top turret, as we were heading south toward Italy, I could see 2 what appeared to be fighter planes closing real fast. And when they got close enough, my gosh, it was red-tailed Tuskegee P-51s. And they waggled their tails just as to say everything is okay. And they escorted us out of danger. So others here probably have some stories that you'd like to share. Aki?
Want me to tell you?
No.
I got a couple. 1 or 2 that I didn't tell you this morning. I'm going to tell you about my favorite heroes during the war. Number 1 bunch is the ground crew. Without the ground crew, the air crews would never get off the ground. They'd be working day and night, night and day, rain, shine, whatever. And they didn't have any hangars and any cover to work. They were lucky when they're changing an engine to have a piece of canvas flapping away in the wind. And the ground crews really was kept the air crews flying. And when an aircraft is on the ground, it belongs to the ground crews. When the aircraft gets in the air, it belongs to the air crews. And Uncle Sam paid for the airplane. It was a taxpayer that paid for it. So we all call it our plane. The other heroes that I'm talking about are the Tuskegee Airmen. We used to call them our red-tailed angels. The P-51s had red tails, red noses, and either yellow stripes or red stripes on the wings. And we're flying home over, the mission I'm talking about now is Vienna, February the 7th. And we got shot up very bad over the target, and we lost 3 engines over Vienna. And I'm in the nose, and I'm in there, I'm looking, I see this blue dome coming up to us. It was the St. Cowles Church dome, the church in the center of town. Well, finally the pilot got another engine going, so we had two engines. And we were straggling home with two engines. The bomb bay doors were open. We couldn't lock them down. The hydraulic system was shot out. The radio system was shot out. The intercom, we couldn't communicate. And we're straggling home all alone. We're about 400 miles in German territory. Well, we finally straggled away from the flak towers of Vienna and the flak guns and batteries around there. And we're about, maybe 40, 50 minutes away from the target. And I'm in the nose and I can't talk to anybody. I hit the buttons and all I get is a rush of noise, like static or something. So we're flying along and all of a sudden at 2 o'clock I see two spots out there. 2 dots, maybe a couple of 1,000 yards out there. And I hit the button, I was going to tell the crew I'm seeing something, nothing. So a couple of seconds, maybe 20, 30 seconds later, I noticed the planes were not turning into a pursuit curve, with going on that wing and that nose point right at you. So again, I tried to contact the crew, but I couldn't do it. And eventually, that plane, first plane and this wingman were out there, they were kind of sliding in towards my right wing. And about, 1,000 yards or 800 yards, I spotted them, and I could see the red tails, and I could see that star and bar on the side of the aircraft. And I knew they were our Tuskegee Airmen, our red tail angels, I'll never forget that feeling. And the wingman was up above about 1,500 yards and 1,000 yards, crisscrossing all the way. And they took us all the way home. And that's why the red tail angels are my heroes. And I'll tell you another story about when I was coming home, when I finished my tour. I was in Naples waiting for a ship to take us home. Finally, the ships were available. They're all stacked up in the page there, and the troops were going to be going home. The war was over now. 3 weeks, the war was over. And we got on a Liberty ship. There were 28 sergeants, all gunners, and 1 major. That was all the soldiers were on that Liberty ship. Man, how lucky can you get, The other ships had a couple of hundred or 1,000 guys on there. Well, anyway, we got on this ship, and we were very fortunate. We were out, we was the last convoy to leave Naples. And then we picked up about 20 ships in the convoy. And then when we headed to Algiers in Oran, we picked up another 20 ships. And we were traveling as fast as the slowest ship in the convoy, maybe 5 knots, Well, anyway, we finally passed the Rock of Gibraltar, all the convoy, and I'd say maybe a couple of days, 3 or 4 days later, we're south of the Azores, and the convoy breaks up. What I learned was that all the submarines, the German submarines, were accounted for, and every ship took off to their own direction. And of course, we were going at 15 knots now, not that 5 knots. And we were heading for New York Harbor. Oh man, when we arrived in the harbor, the tugboats, the fireboats, they had flags flying, the sprays of water blowing their horns, welcoming the soldiers home, because a lot of other ships had soldiers. And when we got there, it was about 4 p.m. or so, after 4 o'clock, so they wouldn't let us dock that day. So we anchored about, a couple of 100 yards from the Statue of Liberty. And we could hear the cities and the noise in the city, the horns and the lights were on. And here we are on that ship, and there's New York City right there. We couldn't do anything. Well, early the next morning we got up, we were eager, man. Instead of docking on the New York side, we docked on the Jersey side. And that particular dock, no troops ever landed there before. And the girls were coming out of the office buildings, they came on the ship and we were their heroes. That was great for a couple hours, And finally the buses came to take us to Camp Kilmer. Well, we got on the bus, and here we are still in our khakis, and we were still wearing our combat boots, And And we get on the bus and they take us to Camp Kilmer, and everybody has a steak. You know, they have a steak for you, the whole 9 yards. Ice cream, real milk, the whole thing, you know. I must have drank about 3 or 4 ice cream sodas, you know. And then that afternoon, still the same day now, we're up early in the morning, the same day, the bus takes us to the Grand Central Station, and we get on a train. And the train goes to Boston, because all of us were from the New England area. And we get to Boston, we got on the train, instead of going to Boston, we went to Fort Devens, which is just north of Boston. And we got there around midnight. And you know, here we are in our ruffled up khakis, you know, kind of messed up, in our combat boots. And Tony, this kid from Bristol, Maine, he says, "Come on, Greek, let's go dancing." "Are you crazy? It's midnight, I want to go to bed." "Come on." Well, he finally convinced me. So the two of us, we take off, no passenger, we just walk out the base, and we're looking for a tavern or a bar and grill that has a jukebox. We wanted to dance. So about half an hour or so later, we find this bar, we walk downstairs, and by the far corner, there's a jukebox all lit up and a little dance floor. And on the dance floor were 2 waves dancing. You know, the girls in the Navy. So Tony and I, we rush over there, you know, they're dancing, and I tap them on the back, you know. And they turn around, they look at Tony and I and say, "What the hell we have here?" Here we are in our combat boots and our dirty khakis. And I said, "Look, we haven't seen an American Girl in 9 months, and all we want to do is dance." Well, finally, we did dance. We danced for about an hour and a half. And there's one song we kept on playing. They kept on playing. I never heard it before. The song was by Les Brown's orchestra. Doris Day was singing it, and the title of the song was "Sentimental Journey."
Oh,
Right now, I'm telling you, dancing cheek to cheek with a girl you haven't had in your arms in 9 months, we're in heaven. Well, we thanked the girls. We went back to the base, took a quick shower, hit the sack. 6 o'clock in the morning, we were up, ready for processing, and by noontime, we're ready to go home. So 5 of us that live in the New England area, we paid the taxi driver $5 apiece, and he took us to Haymarket Square, Boston. And from there, we all dispersed in different directions, going home. And that's my story.
You were mentioning the fact about Semperini. He just passed away this year. He was living in Torrance. And the truth of the fact is that I don't understand how a man could go through all the suffering that he did as a prisoner of the Japanese.
Right.
He was
Yeah, he did just
one
pass
guy
away,
was
right?
beating up with a belt buckle
Yeah.
every time he saw him.
I want to mention again, for any of you that have a serious interest in the air war in Europe, get that book, The Forgotten 500. It's one of the greatest war stories, and particularly appropriate now because it illustrates the long-term intentions of the Russians to dominate and infiltrate. And they did that very well. In World War II, while they were our allies, they were doing a lot of undercover stuff. So if you haven't read it, remember it's The Forgotten 500, and a great story. You know, getting after the war, we had a point system to get discharged. And I'm sitting over at Chanute Field, not very far from my home in Indiana, with, I think it was 76 points. And you needed 85 to be eligible to become discharged. So I only had, at that point, 19 months of service, military service. I'd taken my training, flown my missions, and now I was back in the States. So I went to this WAC officer, female officer there at Chanute Field, and I explained to her that I wanted to get out of the service so I could start college. And so she awarded to me 2 battle stars that made me have a total of 8. And the interesting part was that the 2 battle stars that she awarded took place when I wasn't even overseas. So I ended up with 86 points, and 2 months later, now I've been in the service 21 points, I'm enrolled at Indiana University. I got out, I think, like 2 days before the fall term of 1945. And I'm in classes with mostly girls of 40 girls and maybe 1 or 2 other fellas, and they weren't veterans, they were just young fellas, you know, starting to college. And so that was a good life. But I told one of my friends about that, and he suggested that I needed that kind of odds. So does anyone else have any comments they'd like to make about what happened to them, or any special missions? Or we do have a little time for our regular schedule, but of course we can adjourn to the hospitality room too. Anyone at all?
Well, I got one story. It has nothing to do with the war or anything else like that. But it had to do with, we had our R&R, if you will, in the Isle of Capri, which was very hard to take. Yes. And there was a little Italian girl that used to come down the beach all the time while we were laying on the beach and swimming and what have you. And she never turned her back to us. She always just sort of walked, you know, like that, just walk away. We were wondering what's going on, so we asked one of the nurses that was with us, you know, what's that all about? Well, one of the gals spoke Italian, and she said she has a little hole in her bathing suit, and she's embarrassed. Oh, I said, gee, we can pick that up, we'll go buy her a new bathing suit. So we did. Next day, here she is, coming down. Nurse shows her her new bathing suit. Off comes the old bathing suit, and on goes the new bathing suit. Yeah, that was one of the fun times.
Story, I thought about it when we get in a tight like us and the engineer there, when the fighters were bad and the flag was bad, and you know, we're jerking, and he couldn't say anything, couldn't move a hand. But we'd get in one of these sessions like that, and everybody lying and carrying on, you know, all really bad. And there was one of our group would jump up and say, and there I was, 30,000 feet over Rooster Boot, Mississippi, both pups, feathers, and an automatic pilot wheel.
Well, you know, in the dark days of the war, there also was some brightness. We had one pilot, John O'Connor, who would not select anyone for his crew that was not an accomplished musician. And we have a picture in one of our newsletters of him and his crew members playing different instruments and so forth. And he would travel to different military bases in Italy to entertain people. But he found out that apparently there was a piano over in Naples that he needed for his band. So he actually flew a B-24 over to Naples and brought that piano back to the base and entertained some of our people. So it was nice that people could be thinking about you know, fun things, even though it was you didn't like to see your name on the board to fly the next day. You wanted to finish your missions, but you were kind of afraid to. So that was the time. Anyone else with any?
One more. We used to go swimming in the Mediterranean every afternoon after work. And it was truckload of about 24 of us would go there. And one time, one of the boys had to go to the bathroom, so he went over a little knoll. And we got on the other side. There were guys from Italy dressed for combat, waiting. They had been waiting there for a week and they chickened out. They had been let off by a submarine into that area. They were let off on a little boat. They hid the boat and they were hiding behind that thing for a week. When my friend went over there to relieve himself, they surrendered to him right away. So that story came out of the Stars and Stripes because he was unarmed. He was in his bathing suit.
Okay, Sedge?
Couple of little stories on the tail end of everything. I mentioned in my little talk about Captain Thomas coming back with my aircraft with a hole about the size of a baseball and a windshield. That windshield was about 4 to 6 inches thick. I made him get his flak helmet on and his flak vest and everything. Get out there and he had his hand through the windshield so that you couldn't see it, just his arm. And I got a picture while I was sitting out on the nose turret guns. I got a picture of him with a hand through that windshield. The other story is that after I got transferred up to wing, we came out of Foggia one night, been to the USO Club. British lorry hit a young Italian boy that was riding a bicycle. He went into the ditch about 30 feet away, kind of crawled out of there crying and everything. Bicycle was a mess. We took the bike down to the motor pool, got a hold of Maroney, and asked him if we could find parts for it. Boy, he says, shoot, we'll make parts for it, but there's only one problem. Oh, it'll have to be green when we get it finished. Lo and behold, we got the wheels all straightened out, got the frame straightened out, put spokes in it, got them straightened out, made some spokes out of some safety wire. Found out where the boy lived, took it down. Steve and I walked in, well, part of the Jeep. I won't tell whose Jeep it was. But pulled into the farmyard, and here comes Dad and Mom out of the house to find out what's going on. We got the Jeep tied in the back, limb in the back of the Jeep, or the bike rather. We took the bike off and set it down. You'd have thought that the world had just come to an end. They started screaming, they couldn't believe it. Here's an American GI with their son's bike in the back end of the Jeep. And the upshot of the whole story was that we got invited in for a meal. I couldn't believe it. Walked into that house, here's a cow staring through the door for the animals on the other end of the house. They had the one room, the bedrooms were upstairs. Before we left, we found out what that circle was. That the block was built up about that high, and the circle was just about as big around as this room. We couldn't figure out what it was for, other than the fact that very obviously it was a haystack. Dad walked over, did like this. There's a Mercedes sitting there inside that haystack.
Thanks, Ed. Anyone else? Well, I think hopefully the hospitality room is open, and if we move, oh guys, the bus people are back. We can't beat them down. So anyway, I want to thank you for attending, and I guess the hospitality hour starts at 6 o'clock tonight, and then at 7, dinner. And I think checkout tomorrow is 12 o'clock, before 12 o'clock noon, and I know many of you are checking out. And there are other programs that continued on Sunday, but you probably have all your travel arrangements made, so if you haven't signed up for them, why, probably to no avail. So anyway, we'll keep you posted on future plans for a reunion, and more than likely there will be one, and we don't know just exactly where, and we hope it can include the 455th Bomb Group. We seem to be well matched, and I think with just a little effort, the 455th can get out a lot more people than we've had so far. So thanks again, and this may be my last official function at this particular reunion, but I know it's been very difficult for some of you to get here, and it certainly is appreciated, and I think we'll keep the newsletters flowing, and but don't forget our newsletter cost and so forth is strictly dependent upon donations. We handle our reunion activities just about on a break-even basis. I think last time out we might have lost a few $100s, but that's just one aspect of our organization. You know, we don't have any dues. We didn't inherit any money when we started 8 years ago. So if you are able to, why your donations are appreciated, and I want to thank many of you here for frequent donations, because that's what's kept us going over the last 8 years. So thank you very much.